Hello there, boos and ghouls. It is once again October, which means it is my favorite season of the year. Halloween series 2024! Yay! So, this year, for Halloween, I'm doing black horror, or horror noir, as it's sometimes called. In this case, I'm doing films, but this could be films, literature, media of any kind that focuses on the experience of black people. This may be African, this may be Afro-Caribbean, this may be African-American, and indeed the films that I'm going to be talking about for this series are all African-American driven films. Typically African-American majority, if not entire casts, often directed, written, whatever it is, produced by African Americans. And black horror tends to, though doesn't exclusively, tends to focus a lot on elements of race, racism, and the violence inherent in a racially hierarchized society. Happy Halloween, everyone. So this is the final video of my Halloween 2024 series. We're going to be talking about Nia DaCosta's film Candyman. Now, this is the fourth film in the Candyman series, the first one being the 1992 film, and then there have been two subsequent movies in the series. I have not seen any of the first three, but that's okay. To watch DaCosta's 2021 version of Candyman, it's actually fine to watch it without having seen the series. It works as a standalone movie. So, first off, I'm going to not generally say the name of the film or the titular character anymore. I don't know if this camera counts as a mirror, but I've already said it 3 times, and the urban legend is that if you say the name 5 times into a mirror, you will summon the Seaman. We'll call him the Seaman for safety's sake. Now, I don't really believe in this. This is a film conceit, and rooted in a short story, which might or might not be rooted in urban legends. It's similar to something like the Bloody Mary ritual, where you say her name 3 times in a mirror, and there's some different variations of it, but basically then she appears and kills you. The same thing with Seaman. You say his name 5 times in a mirror, he shows up, he kills you. Again, I don't believe it, but I also don't want to fuck around with it. So, okay, so this is actually a really, really good film to close out this month of black horror discussion, because this is a contemporary piece, the ethos of which is very much rooted in the Black Lives Matter movement. And again, one of the things that is really, really important about black horror as a genre is that it tends to reflect racial concerns. It tends to reflect real problems of racism, racialized violence, etc., etc. And so in that sense, this film definitely does that. And of course, in 2021, we were at the height of the Black Lives Matter movement, and people were very much consciously aware of the problems of racial violence, particularly in policing. And that is really sort of the jumping off point for this film. We have a non-linear plot line, but essentially if you were to think about it in terms of the chronological order,
of what we actually see. The earliest thing depicted is the 1977 murder of a man named Sherman Fields by police in the Cabrini Green housing projects in Chicago. Fields is a weird dude. He distributes candy to local children, hence the name. And he has a hook instead of a right hand, I think. Yeah, I think it's his right hand. So he's a weird dude, but he's basically harmless. However, and this was another big scare of the 70s, right? Was razor blades showing up in Halloween candy. And so that happens. There's a razor blade that shows up in a child's piece of candy, a white child's piece of candy. It's worth noting. And so police brutally beat Sherman Fields to death. This murder is more or less witnessed by a kid named William Burke. And then we jump ahead to basically the present, to 2019. We follow an artist named Anthony McCoy. He is from Chicago, but he's been struggling to update and modernize his work. His work seems to have stagnated, and so he ends up going to Cabrini Green, looking for inspiration after his girlfriend and gallery director Brianna Cartwright's brother, Troy, tells them the story of Helen Lyle, a woman who was accused of this murder spree that was actually, as we find out later in the film, committed by Seaman. Basically, McCoy starts going around Cabrini Green. He ends up talking to William Burke, who tells him the legend. McCoy also gets stung on his hand by a bee. And as that gets... Basically, his hand starts rotting. And not only does he not really do anything about that, nobody else around him seems especially concerned, even as it starts to spread up his whole arm. So that's an element. And so basically, McCoy becomes really fascinated by the Seaman legend. He builds an art piece around it, with a mirror incorporated, encouraging viewers of the piece to say the name 5 times in front of the mirror. After the show closes, it does not necessarily go well. People don't respond to it, including this art critic. And the gallery owner, Clive, has some disparaging remarks. But after the show closes, Clive and his girlfriend say the name 5 times in front of the mirror. Seaman appears, murders them both. We get several other instances where basically people summon the Seaman, he kills them, etc., etc. You know, standard slasher flick type stuff, standard Bloody Mary style urban legend stuff. Great. As this is going on, McCoy is doing more research about Seaman, about Helen Lyle. He's trying to sort of come to terms with what's going on, especially in his own head, particularly as he starts having these hallucinations or visitations or whatever it is, where in mirrors, he starts seeing himself as the bloodied corpse of Sherman Fields. So that's not great. As this is going on, he's also painting these very dark, macabre paintings, which when his girlfriend Brianna finds them, she is not thrilled with that turn of events. Yeah. So, as part of his research into this legend, McCoy goes back to William Burke, who tells him that basically that Seaman is the result of collective trauma in the neighborhood, starting from the 1890s when a portrait painter named Daniel Robitaille was brutally murdered by a white mob for having an affair with a white woman. And they cut off his hand and jammed a meat hook in it, hence, which of course obviously would destroy his painting career if they hadn't also brutally murdered him. So that's where the hook story originates. And they smeared him with honey so he would be stung to death by bees, which is why Candy, almost said it a fourth time, which is why Seaman is associated with bees. Remember the bee sting on McCoy's hand that then just starts, his whole hand starts rotting. And basically by the end of the film, the whole right side of his body has just like degenerated with gangrene or something like this. So according to Burke, Robitaille's spirit has joined together with the spirits or souls or whatever it is of a bunch of other African Americans who have been murdered in this neighborhood. And Seaman becomes this sort of repository for collective African American trauma, which of course was very thematically relevant during the heyday of the Black Lives Matter movement. The idea that individual experiences of police violence against African Americans were not individual experiences, but were part of a collective history rooted in America's problematic approach to race and rooted in norms of violence against certain portions of American society, the dehumanization of certain portions of American society, and brutality being a central experience. So Seaman becomes this So this is the interesting thing. We find out that Burke has basically been trying to resurrect Seaman. He's basically been trying to bring this figure back. It almost like the Golem legend from Jewish mythology, right? This idea of you create a monster and unleash it against your enemies, unleash it against those who are persecuting you. That's essentially Burke's plan, is to bring back Seaman and have him defend the community, defend the embattled African-American community of Cabrini Green, who are still subject to police violence, which we see very much at the end of the film, because so Burke kidnaps Brianna. He's going to make her a witness and possibly sacrifice to him transforming McCoy fully into Seaman. So Burke, in a church in Cabrini Green, Burke cuts off McCoy's hand. McCoy is basically in a sort of fugue state. He's maybe drugged, maybe just like having a psychotic break. It's not 100% clear. But so Burke cuts off his hand, puts a meat hook in there. He eats a lollipop with a razor in it. So he's just really gone all out on this. Brianna manages to escape. Burke chases her down and she stabs him to death. McCoy, who's now sort of Seaman, shows up, and she's like ready to fight him if she has to when he collapses. The police arrive, and even though McCoy is literally on the ground, posing no threat whatsoever, they shoot him repeatedly. The police then arrest Brianna and basically say, listen, either you can tell people that this shooting was totally justified, we did the right thing to save your life, or we can frame you as an accomplice. She asks to see herself in the rearview mirror of the police car, at which point she summons Seaman. It brings Anthony McCoy back, and he's basically now your sort of supernatural, invulnerable slasher, in the vein of like a Freddy Krueger or a Chucky or something like this. And he kills these corrupt police officers. He frees Brianna from the police car, etc., etc. Yeah. So again, it is very much a film that's fascinated by the cultural moment out of which it comes, and it is a film that is responding to the real experience of collective trauma, collective suffering, collective violence against the African American community in the US. It's also just a properly good film. On a cinematic level, it's really, really interesting and really, really well done. Like, one of the things that struck me, and I want to talk about this just very quickly, is the use of camera angles. The camera angles here are amazingly good. They're really fascinating because DaCosta uses the camera to unsettle us. And that's a very common thing, right? With slasher films, they're often filmed in idiosyncratic ways, typically with elements like seeing from the killer's perspective or sort of watching potential victims from odd angles, things like this. But here, the space itself is often made strange by the camera. Like, there's a lot of shots, especially early on in the film. The credit sequence at the beginning of the film is filmed almost upwards. Like, the camera is basically traveling through the city. We're seeing these skyscrapers going up into the clouds. And it's very, very unsettling. It's very disconcerting, because of the angle at which we're seeing this space, right? So it's a technique for making strange a space that otherwise might be quite familiar. The city, for many people, is a very familiar space, but we see these buildings from the bottom up, and they just sort of disappear. The tops sort of just disappear. It's a very odd image. And it works really, really well to create this feeling of unease. And it It's fantastic.